The creek was my haven. Tucked behind my 3 acres of rolling Virginia countryside, it wound through willows and wildflowers, its gentle gurgle a soundtrack to my evenings. Dragonflies skimmed the surface, and my 3 beehives hummed nearby, their honey a small miracle I shared with neighbors. I bought this land 5 years ago, trading city noise for soil under my nails and the kind of quiet that feels earned. My lab Pixel would chase fireflies along the bank, her tail a metronome of joy. This was home, every inch of it. Then Karen Davis decided the creek belonged to her. Karen lived 2 lots over, her McMansion a shrine to HOA perfection, manicured lawn, white shutters, and a mailbox embossed with her initials. As HOA president, she wielded rules like a scepter, fining folks for unapproved birdhouses or grass 2 inches too tall. I'd stayed off her radar, paying dues and keeping my split-rail fence rustic but compliant. But last spring, Karen's gaze turned to the easement along the creek, a shared strip technically on my deed but accessible to the neighborhood for recreational use. She wanted it for the HOA, her HOA. It started with a knock. Karen, platinum blonde bob gleaming, stood on my porch in a blazer sharp enough to cut glass. "We're installing a fence," she announced, gesturing toward the creek. The HOA voted to secure the easement for community use. Her smile was all teeth, no warmth. I blinked, processing. The HOA hadn't notified me, and my deed clearly showed the creek as mine, easement or not. I invited her in, hopping to talk sense over coffee. She declined, tapping her clipboard. "It's happening, sign here to acknowledge." I didn't sign. Instead, I dug out my surveyor's map and deed, scanned them, and emailed the HOA board, politely asking for clarification. No response came, but the next day I found metal posts sprouting along the creek, a chain-link fence half erected. It wasn't just ugly, it blocked my path to the water and crushed a patch of milkweed I planted for monarchs. Pixel whined, sensing my tension. I called the county surveyor's office, who confirmed the fence was illegal. Armed with their letter and my documents, I approached Karen's crew, 2 guys in overalls, clearly hired muscle. "This is my land," I said, holding up the map. "You're trespassing." They shrugged and kept hammering. Karen appeared, phone in hand, smirking. "I'll let the sheriff handle this," she said, dialing. Deputy Rogers arrived within the hour, his pickup crunching gravel. He was mid-40s with a calm drawl and eyes that missed nothing. I handed him the deed and surveyor's letter. Karen, arms crossed, insisted the HOA had eminent domain rights. Rogers skimmed the papers, then turned to her. "Ma'am, this creek's his. The easement doesn't give you fencing rights. Take these posts down by tomorrow or I'll cite you for trespass." He tipped his hat. "Have a pleasant day." Karen's face flushed, her manicured nails digging into her palms. I thanked Rogers, expecting that to end it. But as he drove off, Karen muttered, "This isn't over." Her eyes locked on mine, cold and unyielding. I'd seen that look before, in city bosses who thrived on power, in bullies who mistook kindness for weakness. She wasn't just after the creek, she wanted to win. Back home, I reinforced my no trespassing signs, nailing them to every post along the creek. Pixel curled up by the fireplace, and I sat with a beer, staring at the surveyor's map. The creek was mine, legally and emotionally, where I'd scattered my dad's ashes, where I planned to build a greenhouse someday. Karen's fence wasn't just a boundary violation, it was personal. I hoped she'd back off. The HOA board, silent so far, might rein her in, but deep down I knew better. Karen Davis didn't lose battles gracefully. She ruled this neighborhood for years, bending rules to her will. My little rebellion, deed in hand, sheriff on my side, was a crack in her kingdom. She'd come for me harder next time. As the sun dipped below the willows, I checked the locks and set my phone to record any late-night visitors. The creek still sang, but its song felt like a warning. This was only the spark. Whatever Karen had planned, I'd be ready. 2 weeks after Deputy Rogers shut down Karen's fence, I came home to a war zone. My split-rail fence along the creek was slashed in 3 places, splinters jutting like broken bones. Deep tire tracks scarred the muddy bank, crushing the milkweed I'd planted for monarchs. One of my beehives lay toppled, frames scattered like discarded toys, honey oozing into the grass. The air smelled of wax and betrayal. Worst of all, Pixel, my lab, yelped as she limped toward me, a nail board, spikes up, deliberately placed, stuck to her paw. My stomach churned. This wasn't just vandalism, it was personal. At the vet, Pixel got stitches and antibiotics. Watch for infection, Dr. Lee said, her frown mirroring mine. I drove home, rage simmering. Karen had crossed a line and I was done playing defense. I ordered 4 motion sensor cameras, the kind that ping your phone every 10 seconds until muted, and called Nora Beltran, a surveyor with a reputation for precision and steel. Nora arrived the next day, her boots crunching gravel, and marked my property with fluorescent orange stakes. She stapled laminated placards to each one, citing Virginia Code on felony penalties for tampering with survey monuments. "Let's see them try," she said, smirking. I mounted the cameras that evening, angling them to cover the creek and fence line. The willows swayed in the dusk, their shadows long and restless. I hoped the stakes and signs would deter Karen, but my gut said otherwise. She wasn't the type to slink away. Sure enough, at 1:13 a.m., my phone buzzed with alerts. The live stream showed 2 figures in hoodies creeping along the creek, yanking Nora's stakes and tossing them into the water. One carried bolt cutters, his face lit by moonlight as he sliced my repaired fence. The other, shorter, with platinum blonde hair spilling from her hood, moved with Karen's unmistakable swagger. To make matters worse, Karen had called 911 earlier that evening, claiming my glowing orange stakes were threatening Halloween decor meant to scare her. She ranted about spooky lights harassing the HOA, demanding an officer. Deputy Rogers, already suspicious from her last complaint, took the call himself. He chuckled when he saw my stakes, professional, legal, and anything but festive. Karen's stunt only sharpened his focus on her. Rogers knew the bolt cutter guy from the footage. Chandler, a local troublemaker with a rap sheet for petty scams. He'd been spotted at Karen's house before, doing odd jobs for the HOA. The blonde figure needed no introduction. Karen's hair and posture were as loud as a billboard. At dawn, Rogers and 2 deputies knocked on Chandler's door. Body cam footage later showed him in sagging pajama pants, swearing he'd been asleep all night. Rogers held up a still from my camera, Chandler mid-grimace, bolt cutters glinting. "Care to explain?" Rogers asked. Chandler's jaw snapped shut. Karen's arrest was smoother but no less damning. Rogers executed a warrant at her McMansion, finding Nora's stolen stakes stacked in her garage beside a half-empty can of red spray paint, the same shade defacing my no trespassing signs. Laminated placards, crumpled and muddy, sat in a trash bin. Karen claimed Chandler had stored tools there without her knowledge, her voice syrupy with innocence. Rogers wasn't fooled. He cuffed her for criminal mischief and trespassing, her blazer rumpling as she was led to the squad car. Both were booked at the county jail. Karen made bond by lunch, her lawyer already spinning excuses. Chandler wasn't so lucky. His 2021 check fraud probation meant a no bail hold, his fate tangled in a parole board's hands. As I cleaned Pixel's paw and rebuilt the beehive, the creek's gurgle felt less like a lullaby and more like a battle cry. Karen's 911 call, meant to paint me as the villain, had boomeranged. Rogers was watching her now, and my cameras were rolling. Whatever she tried next, I'd be ready, stakes, signs, and all. With Chandler locked up and Karen out on bond, I thought the worst was over. The creek flowed freely again, and Pixel's paw was healing, her tail wagging as she chased dragonflies. But Karen's shadow loomed larger than her McMansion, and I wasn't naive enough to think she'd quit. My lawyer, Elliot, a wiry man with a knack for sniffing out lies, suggested we dig deeper. "She didn't just want your creek," he said, sipping coffee at my kitchen table. "This smells like a scheme." We started with the HOA's financials, subpoenaing records to trace the $3,500 gate Karen had installed to choke my creek access. The paper trail led to a cashier's check signed by Chandler, drawn from the HOA's reserve fund. It was sloppy. Chandler, the HOA's bookkeeper, hadn't even bothered with a fake vendor. Elliot's eyes gleamed. "This isn't a one-off," he said. We kept digging, and the numbers told a grim story. Over 2 years, Chandler had siphoned $46,900 for grounds improvements that never happened. No new benches, no playground, just phantom invoices and forged receipts. The HOA board, a mix of retirees and young families, was horrified. At an emergency meeting in the community center, they pored over the records, faces paling as Elliot laid out the fraud. Mrs. Larson, a board member who'd once baked me zucchini bread, slammed her fist on the table. That gate was Corinne's pet project. She pushed it through. The board voted unanimously to press charges against Chandler and audit every cent he'd touched. Corinne's name hung unspoken, but everyone knew she was next. Detective Miriam Page from the county's white-collar crime unit took the case. A sharp woman with a no-nonsense ponytail, she seized Chandler's home computer and cracked it open like a walnut. The hard drive was a jackpot. Fake meeting minutes claiming the board approved the gate, a Word template for neon green approval stamps, and bank records showing $12,000 funneled to Corinne's personal account, labeled consulting fees. Corinne, it seemed, hadn't just egged Chandler on, she'd profited directly. Page called it conspiracy with a side of greed. Chandler staring down felony theft charges and a probation revocation for his 2021 check fraud didn't have Corinne's cash or clout. Trapped in county jail, his bravado crumbled. Elliot got word through Page that Chandler wanted a deal. He'd testify against Corinne for a lighter sentence. He claimed she'd masterminded the land grab, using the gate to test if she could annex my creek for the HOA's future development. Chandler handled the dirty work, forging documents, cutting fences, tossing stakes, while Corinne played queen. His confession was a lifeline, but Elliot warned me, Corinne's not going down easy. Corinne lawyered up fast, hearing James Hall, a $600 an hour defense attorney who looked like he ironed his smirk. Hall refused interviews, stonewalling Page's questions, but the evidence was piling up. Corinne's 911 call about my spooky survey stakes had become neighborhood legend, whispered over mailboxes and coffee. She'd claimed my fluorescent markers were Halloween decor meant to intimidate the HOA, but Deputy Rogers' report painted her as paranoid, not a victim. The story eroded her HOA throne. Neighbors who'd once feared her now rolled their eyes. I wasn't celebrating yet. Corinne's influence ran deep, and Hall's fees suggested she had resources I didn't. I doubled down, meeting Nora Beltran to recheck every survey stake and installing 2 more cameras, their red lights glowing like sentinels along the creek. The willows swayed under a harvest moon, and the air smelled of damp earth and resolve. Pixel slept by the fireplace, her snores a small comfort, but I stayed up, scrolling through camera feeds, half expecting Corinne's next move. The community was shifting, though. Mrs. Larson dropped off a casserole, whispering, "We're with you." The HOA board emailed a formal apology for the gate, promising reforms. Even Rogers, stopping by to check on Pixel, clapped my shoulder. "Corinne's running out of rope," he said. I nodded, but my grip tightened on the surveyor's map. This wasn't just about the creek anymore. It was about rooting out the rot she'd spread. Chandler's testimony, Page's evidence, and my cameras were closing the net, but Corinne was a fighter. I'd need every ally, every stake, every frame of footage to finish this. The courtroom smelled of polished wood and tension, a stark contrast to the creek's earthy freedom. After months of legal wrangling, Corinne Davis and Chandler stood trial, their fates tied to a jury of farmers, teachers, and retirees. I sat in the gallery, Pixel's healed paw a quiet victory at home, my surveyor's map folded in my pocket like a talisman. Corinne, in a tailored blazer, stared ahead, her platinum blonde bob as sharp as ever. Chandler, gaunt in a cheap suit, fidgeted, his eyes darting to the exit. The air crackled with anticipation. This was the reckoning. Chandler took the stand first, his voice shaky but clear. Facing felony charges and a revoked probation for his 2021 check fraud, he'd cut a deal, testify truthfully for a shot at parole. He laid out Corinne's scheme with grim precision. She targeted my creek to expand the HOA's community assets, planning to annex it for a future sale. Chandler promised a cut of the profits, forged HOA minutes, wrote fake checks, and did her dirty work cutting my fence, smashing my beehive, tossing Nora's stakes into the creek. She called the shots, he said, glancing at Corinne. Her attorney, James Hall, scribbled furiously, but Chandler's words landed like hammer blows. The prosecutor, a lean woman named Tors, built an ironclad case. She played my Ring camera footage on a courtroom screen. Corinne and Chandler at 12:47 a.m., loading rebar into her SUV, the timestamp matching the night Nora's stakes vanished. The jury leaned forward, eyes narrowing as Karen's blonde hair glinted in the moonlight. Torres presented the financials: $46,900 drained from the HOA, $12,000 funneled to Karen as consulting fees. A forensic accountant confirmed the fraud, tracing every cent. Physical evidence sealed it. The red spray paint can from Karen's garage, its shade an exact match to my defaced "no trespassing" signs, Nora's crumpled placards fished from her trash, and the stolen stakes still muddy from the creek. Hall's defense was slick but hollow. He claimed Chandler acted alone, framing Karen to save himself. Karen, he insisted, was a dedicated HOA leader unaware of the fraud. Torres countered with Karen's 911 call about my spooky survey stakes, playing the recording for the jury. Karen's voice, shrill and entitled, ranted about threatening orange markers. The gallery stifled laughs. Her attempt to paint me as a villain had only exposed her desperation. Deputy Rogers, testifying, noted her garage held the exact evidence she denied knowing about. Hall's smirk faded. The jury deliberated for 3 hours, a lifetime in the stuffy courtroom. When they returned, the foreman's voice was steady: guilty on all counts: felony conspiracy, theft, criminal mischief, and misdemeanor trespassing. Karen's jaw tightened, her blazer no shield against the verdict. Chandler slumped, resigned. I exhaled, the weight of months lifting, though my hands still trembled. Sentencing came a week later. The judge, a gray-haired woman with a farmer's pragmatism, didn't mince words. Karen got 18 months in prison, $32,000 restitution to me for damages, and $46,900 to the HOA. A 5-year no-contact order would follow her release, barring her from my land or my life. Her bond was revoked. Deputies cuffed her as Hall protested. Chandler, already serving 18 months for his probation violation, took a 4-year plea for the new charges, parole possible in 2. He testified, but his hands weren't clean. As Karen was led away, our eyes met. Hers burned with defiance, but I saw cracks, fear maybe, or the dawning cost of her greed. I gave a small wave, not out of spite but closure. This wasn't about revenge, it was about my creek, my bees, my dog. Outside, the October air smelled of leaves and liberation. I drove home, the willows along the creek glowing gold in the dusk. Pixel greeted me, tail wagging, her scar a faint line now. The beehives hummed, resilient as ever. That night I walked the creek's bank, the waters gurgle a lullaby again. The scars remained splinters in the fence, a wary edge to my peace, but they were fatting. Karen's reign was over, her HOA throne toppled. Chandler's betrayal, though ugly, had cracked the case open. I thought of Nora's stakes, now firmly replanted, and the cameras still watching. The land was mine, not just on paper but in my bones. I'd fought for it, and I'd won. As the stars emerged, I knew I could finally rest, though I'd keep one eye on the horizon just in case. The dust settled slowly, like pollen on the creek's surface. With Karen in prison and Chandler behind bars, the neighborhood exhaled. The willows along my 3 acres swayed in a November breeze, their leaves a patchwork of gold and rust. Pixel, my lab, bounded through the grass, her paw fully healed, chasing a dragonfly with the glee only a dog can muster. My beehives hummed, their frames repaired, honey thickening for winter. The land felt alive again, but it was more than that. It felt mine, reclaimed not just from Karen's greed but from the fear she'd sown. The HOA, shaken by the $46,900 fraud, acted fast. A new board was elected, led by Mrs. Larson, the zucchini-bred baker with a spine of steel. They met in the community center, windows open to let in the crisp air, and pored over bylaws to root out Karen's loopholes. A week later, a letter arrived, signed by every member. It apologized for the unlawful gate and enclosed a $4,500 check from Chandler's frozen account to cover my ruined beehive, fence, and Pixel's vet bills. "We're starting fresh," Mrs. Larson wrote. "Thank you for standing firm." I framed the letter, not out of pride, but as a reminder of what truth could do. I put the money to work. Where Karen's chain-link fence had scarred the creek bank, I built a greenhouse, its glass panes catching the morning sun like a promise. I hauled lumber and gravel myself, Pixel trotting at my heels, her nose dusted with dirt. By December, the frame stood sturdy, filled with tomato starts, basil, and lavender cuttings. The air inside smelled of warm soil and second chances, a stark contrast to the muddy tire tracks Karen's crew had left. Each seedling felt like a stitch in a wound, healing the land she'd tried to steal. I'd dreamed of this greenhouse since scattering my dad's ashes by the creek. Now it was real. Bees noticed the change. They buzzed stronger, their hives yielding jars of amber honey I shared with Mrs. Larson and the new board. Pixel, too, seemed lighter, her evening romps along the creek bank free of nailboards or danger. The surveyor's stakes, fluorescent orange and firmly replanted by Nora Beltran, stood like sentinels, no longer spooky but proud. Karen's 911 call about them had become a running joke. Neighbors chuckled over coffee, calling it Karen's Halloween meltdown. It was a small victory, but it stung her legacy where it hurt most, her pride. The community was knitting itself back together. At a potluck hosted by the HOA, the first without Karen's iron grip, tables groaned with casseroles and apple pies. Mr. Tran, a quiet retiree who'd once been fined for his rose bushes, raised a glass to new beginnings. Neighbors I'd barely known, intimidated by Karen's reign, stopped by with kind words. "You took her down for all of us," said Jenna, a young mom who'd fought Karen's fines over her kids' chalk drawings. I shrugged, uncomfortable with the hero label, but their support warmed me like the greenhouse's glow. The HOA's reforms went beyond apologies. They posted budgets online, held open forums, and even planted a pollinator garden near the creek, a nod to my bees. Deputy Rogers dropped by one afternoon, his pickup crunching gravel, to check on Pixel. "HOA's acting like grown-ups now," he said, scratching her ears. "Karen's ghost is gone." I nodded, but my hand lingered on the surveyor's map, its creases worn from months of battle. Trust was earned, and I'd keep my cameras rolling, their red lights blinking in the dusk. As winter crept in, I stood in the greenhouse, pruning tomato vines under a sky streaked with pink. The creek gurgled beyond the glass, its song no longer a warning but a welcome. The fight had been brutal, sleepless nights, legal bills, Pixel's pain, but it was worth it. Karen's gate was gone, her schemes buried under guilty verdicts. The land, the bees, and I had endured. I thought of my dad, his ashes part of this earth, and felt him in the soil I turned. This was more than victory, it was rebirth. I wasn't naive, though. Karen's no-contact order stretched 5 years past her release, but her kind left echoes. I'd check the locks, scan the camera feeds, and keep Elliot's number handy. For now, though the greenhouse glowed, Pixel slept by the fire, and the creek sang. I'd earned this peace, and I'd savor it one sunrise at a time. A year after Karen's sentencing, spring crept over my 3 acres, the creek sparkling under budding Will Investigate willows. The air smelled of damp earth and promise, my beehives buzzing with new life. Pixel, my lab, romped through the grass, her scar a faint memory. The greenhouse glowed with tomato vines and lavender, a monument where Karen's gate once stood. I thought the fight was behind me, the creek mine for good. Then Susan Holt, Karen's cousin, came knocking. The letter arrived in March, embossed with a lawyer's seal. Susan claimed Karen had granted her a private right-of-way across my creek, citing a deed dated before the trial. It was a blatant forgery, as flimsy as Karen's old excuses. Elliot, my lawyer, laughed when I showed him. "She's grasping at straws," he said, pulling Nora Beltran's survey records. The deed's boundaries didn't match my land's legal description, and Susan's lawyer, a budget version of Karen's James Hall, folded when we threatened a fraud countersuit. Susan withdrew her claim before a court date was set, her bluff crumbling like Karen's HOA throne. Neighbors chuckled, calling it Karen's last gasp, a nod to her infamous spooky, stakes 911 call that still fueled local gossip. The victory was satisfying, but smaller wins kept coming. Restitution checks trickled in from the state's victim fund, Karen's prison wages garnished at $58 a month. It'd take decades to clear her $32,000 debt to me, let alone the HOA's $46,900, but each check felt like a pebble in her shoe, a reminder of justice. I deposited them, not for the money, but for the principle. The creek flowed free, its gurgle a testament to what I'd fought for. Then came Chandler's letter, postmarked from the state penitentiary. I hesitated, the envelope heavy in my hands. Inside was a handwritten note, his scrawl neater than I'd expected. He'd earned a paralegal certificate, he wrote, and was studying land law to make amends. He apologized for the fence, the beehive, pixels, pain, every cut and stake. I was weak, he admitted, and Karen knew it. Enclosed was a hand-drawn orchard map for my land, apple trees by the creek, sunflowers along the fence. If you ever plant them, he wrote, think of it as my sorry. It was earnest, almost touching, but my trust stayed guarded. I showed the letter to Mrs. Larson over coffee, her zucchini bread warming my kitchen. He's trying, she said, but her eyes held the same caution as mine. Chandler's betrayal had cost too much, honey spilled, pixels limp, my sleepless nights. Still, I wrote back, keeping it brief. Thanks for the map. The sunflowers are taller than ever. Focus on your future. No promises, no warmth, but a crack of grace. Forgiveness didn't mean forgetting. The community had moved on, too. The HOA's new board planted a pollinator garden near the creek, its clover buzzing with my bees. At a spring potluck, neighbors swapped stories of Karen's reign, her 911 call now a punchline. Spooky stakes, Jenna laughed, her kids drawing chalk art without fear of fines. The air smelled of barbecue and renewal, the creek's song weaving through it all. Standing in the greenhouse that evening, I pruned basil under a sky streaked with pink. The creek reflected the stars, its banks lush with milkweed I'd replanted. Pixel slept by the door, her snores a quiet hymn. Chandler's map lay on my desk, not a plan but a gesture. Susan's failed claim was just noise, drowned by the land's pulse. I thought of my dad's ashes, scattered here years ago, and felt him in the soil, the water, the bees. The fight had scarred me, but it had also built this, glass, green, and growing. Closure wasn't a finish line. It was this moment, this land. Spring was here and I was ready, cameras still blinking, heart a little lighter. The creek sang and I listened, rooted deep. Summer draped my 3 acres in green, the creek shimmering under July sun. My greenhouse thrived, its tomato vines heavy with fruit, and Pixel, my lab, dozed in the shade, her tail twitching at passing butterflies. The beehives hummed, their honey sweeter than ever, as if they knew the land was truly ours. Karen's prison sentence and Susan's failed deed claim were fading scars, the creek's song now a melody of peace. Then Sprout Tomorrow, an organic farming nonprofit, bought Karen's McMansion, and the irony hit like a sunrise. Her fortress of control would become a garden for all. Sprout Tomorrow's director, Leela Chen, knocked on my door, her boots muddy from scouting Karen's lot. We're turning it into a community garden, she said, eyes bright. Native pollinators, veggies, the works. Will you consult? I laughed, the kind that bubbles up from deep. Karen, who'd find neighbors for unapproved daisies, would have choked on the idea of her lawn feeding the rabble. I signed on, not just for the bees, but for the poetic justice. Her land, once a stage for HOA tyranny, would bloom where she'd sown division. The first volunteer day was a revelation. Neighbors gathered on Karen's former lawn, now stripped of its manicured perfection. The air smelled of turned earth and possibility. I loaned my brush cutter, its growl drowning out memories of her chain-link gate. Mrs. Larson, the new HOA president, hauled compost, her apron streaked with pride. Jenna's kids, once scolded for chalk art, planted marigolds, their giggles a rebuke to Karen's rules. Deputy Rogers showed up, sleeves rolled, trading his badge for a shovel. Never thought I'd dig here, he said, grinning as he broke sod beside me. We built raised beds, sowed tomatoes, zucchini, and clover for my bees. Leela guided us, her clipboard a far cry from Karen's weaponized version. The work was sweaty, communal healing. Mr. Tran, whose rose bushes Karen had once targeted, staked lavender with a quiet smile. She'd hate this, he whispered, and we shared a nod. The HOA's new board, transparent and neighborly, donated seedlings, their pollinator garden by the creek a sister project. Karen's spooky stakes 911 call, still a neighborhood punchline, felt like ancient history. Her attempt to demonize my survey markers, now a footnote to this vibrant rebirth. As we worked, stories spilled out. Jenna recalled Karen's finds for her kids' lemonade stand. Rogers shared how her 911 calls clogged his desk. Each anecdote chipped away at her legacy, the garden's roots burying her control. By dusk, the beds were planted, the soil dark and promising. We stood back, hands dusty, and surveyed the change. Karen's lawn, once a sterile shrine, was alive with color, marigolds, basil, the hum of early bees. The creek just beyond sparkled, tying my land to this new heart. That evening I walked the creek's bank, Pixel at my heels. The willows swayed, their shadows dancing on the water. The garden's glow across the boundary felt like a bridge, not a barrier. I thought of my dad's ashes, scattered here, and how he'd love this land not just saved but shared. The fight with Karen had been brutal, but it led to this, a community unbound, her tyranny turned to mulch. Her gate, her schemes, her spooky complaints, they'd all crumbled, and from them grew something real. The transformation was therapeutic, not just for me but for all of us. Neighbors lingered after the planting, swapping seeds and plans. Rogers promised to bring his kids next time. Leela sketched a fall harvest fest. The HOA, once Karen's cudgel, was now a partner, its budget open, its meetings packed with voices. I kept my cameras on, their red lights blinking in the dusk, but they felt less urgent. The creek sang, the bees buzzed, and the garden grew. This wasn't just victory, it was redemption rooted deep. As I locked up, the greenhouse glass caught the moon, a beacon where Karen's fence once stood. Pixel's snores filled the house, and I smiled. The community had turned a page, and I was part of it, my land and theirs entwined. Karen's shadow was gone, replaced by soil and laughter. I'd sleep well tonight, the creek's lullaby enough. October's golden light bathed the creek, my 3 acres alive with the hum of bees and Pixel's joyful bounds. The greenhouse stood proud, its basil and tomatoes a quiet defiance where Karen's gate once loomed. Sprout Tomorrow's garden, thriving on her former McMansion lot, was the neighborhood's heart now. Their harvest dinner, set for a crisp evening, drew us all to tables laden with the land's bounty. Roasted butternut squash, honey-glazed carrots, heirloom tomato bruschetta, all grown steps from my door. The air smelled of garlic and gratitude, the creek's gurgle a soft backdrop. I arrived with a jar of my bees' honey, Pixel trotting beside me. Leela Chen, Sprout Tomorrow's director, welcomed everyone, her smile as warm as the bonfire crackling nearby. Neighbors filled the lawn, Mrs. Larson with her zucchini bread, Jenna's kids with marigold crowns, Mr. Tran cradling lavender. Deputy Rogers, off-duty, swapped stories with the new HOA board. The garden, once Karen's sterile shrine, bloomed with life, its raised beds a rebuke to her spooky Stakes 911 call, now a faded joke told over wine. That call, meant to vilify me, had only buried her deeper. Leela raised a glass, nodding to my fight. To resilience, she said, eyes on me. I shrugged, heat rising to my cheeks. The real victory was this: soil turned, wounds healed, a community unbound. We ate, laughed, and shared the harvest, each bite a testament to what grew from Karen's ruin. Her finds, her gate, her schemes, they'd been composted, feeding something better. I'd built a barn that summer, its timbers reclaimed from Karen's old gate, now weathered but strong. Permitted and sturdy, it stood by the creek, a monument to everything we'd overcome. I'd hammered each nail myself, Pixel napping in the sawdust, the willows whispering approval. My dad's ashes, scattered here years ago, seemed to linger in the wood, the water, the earth. The barn wasn't just shelter, it was closure, a place to store tools and dreams. As the dinner wound down, I walked the creek's bank, Pixel at my heels. The stars mirrored the bonfire's glow, the garden's warmth carrying across the boundary. Karen's shadow was gone, her spooky complaints a ghost no one feared. The HOA was transparent, the community tight-knit, the land mine in every sense. I thought of Chandler's orchard map still on my desk and my cautious reply. Forgiveness was a seed, not a harvest yet. Pixel's nose nudged my hand, grounding me. The creek sang, its melody my dad's voice, my home's pulse. The fight had scarred me, splinters, vet bills, sleepless nights, but it had built this, a barn, a garden, a peace I'd earned. I locked the greenhouse, its glass catching the moon, and smiled. The land, the bees, and I were whole. Whatever came next, I'd face it, rooted deep.